In times of chaos and breakdown, where might we turn for guidance? To the myths, the storytellers, the wisdom keepers, and the rabble-rousers. To the ones braving the seas of uncertainty, not with answers, but with poetry, beauty, and well-crafted questions. I'm Ian Mackenzie, co-founder of the School of Mythopoetics, a place to gather with like-hearted folks to navigate the mysteries together. And this is The Crow's Nest, where I speak with an array of guests who are employing their mythic imagination to engage with the tempest of the times. You're invited to join me live on YouTube each week. Visit schoolofmythopoetics.com/podcast to learn more. And now, enjoy our conversation. Greetings, friends. Once again, this is Ian Mackenzie, and I'm here on the Crow's Nest. And this particular episode is stirred by so much of what is going on far away from this place where I am here in Canada, but is deeply troubling and deeply inspiring. And this is what's going on in Iran right now with the revolution uprising that was started by women and is continuing to cascade and reverberate. On social media, I'm doing my best to sort of stay on top of all the different posts that are coming through. And some are deeply inspiring and deeply disturbing. And sometimes it can be hard to make sense about what's going on there. And so I reached out to my guest, who I'll introduce in a moment, to come and speak with me about what's going on over there from his perspective. And this also follows a conversation that I had with a contact he put me in touch with, Sagar, in a previous episode of this Crow's Nest, where she's a female activist from the heart of Iran who shared her perspective and her heart about what's going on. This is a very powerful interview. I was deeply moved by it. And this is also an attempt to bring some context and perspective to what's going on there for folks that are wanting to know and to know how to support as well. And so a few words about my guest. Maziar Ghaderi is an award-winning director, writer, producer, multimedia artist, and educator that works in film, multimedia, and interactive technology. With a background in media production, Maziar strives to articulate his social commentary through metaphors, epiphanies, and critiques that speak to the zeitgeist of our times. And this isn't the first time I've actually been in conversation with Maziar. Formerly, it was actually him and his partner, Patricia, who co-directed or co-produced, co-crafted the documentary about Jordan Peterson, actually on the rise of Jordan Peterson. And that conversation became my very first episode of the Mythic Masculine podcast. And so here I am today, and welcome, Maziar, to this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. Your conversation that we had with you about the Peterson film was one of our favorites, so I'm happy to be back here with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for making the time. And before we jump in, I would love for the listeners to get some sense of your own background, your own history, and your own connection to this story of what's going on in Iran and how you made it to Canada.
So my family came to Canada in 1988 during the Iran-Iraq War. So in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution that ousted the monarchy, the secular monarchy, and instilled the theocracy. It was a populist movement that many people supported, but what happened throughout the 80s is the political opponents of Khomeini were excluded from the public conversation. Many were massacred. There was a huge massacre in '88 of all the political prisoners, and so we came in '88 when I was 5 years old. We sought political asylum in Canada. I grew up partly in Scarborough and then partly in Burnaby, actually. So there's that BC connection, and so I was 5 years old, but Iranian culture, politics when I became older as an adult have been part of my life. And it has inspired many art projects, many to come, and looking at the ways in which what parts of me are Western and what parts of me are Eastern has been an interesting exploration inward as well.
Mm. Thanks for that. And could you give a little more context too on the political situation? Because I also understand, again, I'm limited in my understanding, but was the former monarchy was pretty favorable to the West. That was my understanding, like as in it, but also not great for the people. Is and so there was some meddling, I think, within the U.S. kind of in the affairs that which led to the kind of uprising, the famous takeover, I think, of the embassy, right? I think which became the film I can't remember the name of it now, but of course Ben Affleck was in that. I think that was
Argo.
around that.
Yeah.
Argo, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
which was that whole transition from the former the former monarchy leadership into this new regime. But like when I talked to Sagar, she seemed to articulate that in some ways it was like a religious dictatorship took hold, or sort of took control of a people that were somewhat surprised by all of a sudden what was foisted upon them. Like, is that an accurate, somewhat understanding?
Yeah, so the head of the monarchy was Pahlavi, Shah Reza Pahlavi, and he was appointed by the CIA and Interpol in 1953. In 1953 was key because it was a prime minister democratically elected of Iran, Mossadegh, and he wanted to nationalize the oil industry. And of
Uh-huh.
course, Britain and the US, they didn't want that. So they created an operation, and this is totally declassified now. It's out in the open. It was called Operation Ajax, which it was a coup to remove Mossadegh, and he was under house arrest, uh, and that's where he died. Um, and so he was taken out, and then Shah Pahlavi, who was favorable to the West, was put in, and that was in 53. And yeah, so it was a monarchy. The Shah was very much a modernist. He was interested to modernize Iran, have good relations with Israel, have good relations with the US. And what happened was, he had a secret police himself, Savak,
Mm.
and some of his opponents were also oppressed by him, including the religious right. Khomeini was at the head of that. So he was actually expelled and he lived for 5 years in Paris before he was brought back when the Shah was overthrown. So in 1979, there was a populist movement that was pretty much across the board. It was very much anti-imperial. So a lot of young people were behind it, all walks of life, leftists, conservatives, liberals. But in 2020 hindsight, this is our grandparents' generation, and people were sort of ignorant about what is Sharia law, what is Islamic law. They didn't exactly know what it was. They just sort of figured, well, it's anti-American, and the states has been so horrible with us, which is true. Um, this can be our savior, right? This Khomeini guy. So he was brought back in. The Shah was ousted. What's interesting about the Shah actually was that the Shah was also a religious guy. Like he always wore suits and everything, but he was also religious. He always had a Quran in his breast pocket. He was a Haji, which means he went to Hajj in Mecca. He did the pilgrimage. So he was also a religious guy, but he wasn't an Islamist, right? And I need to take a pause there and define that Islamism, like Zionism, evangelicalism, is the politicization of religious dogma. This idea
Mm.
where you take religious thought, scripture, public opinion, theology essentially, derive what you would like from that and politicize it for geopolitical behaviors, reactions, and actions. So that's Islamism. So it turned into an Islamic theocracy. Now, what happened throughout the 80s was that Khomeini knew the type of group that is able to overthrow a government and to take power. They know exactly what they need to do to keep it. They're the
Mm.
toughest to overthrow. So for 43 years, we've been under this Islamic Republic, which is essentially a theocracy. Um, And so what Khomeini did throughout the 80s is that there were skirmishes and territorial disputes with Iraq with Saddam Hussein. So that started the Iran-Iraq war, which was from 80 to 88. And so Khomeini used that to rally support for him and to sort of say it was kind of like, the Eurasians are at the gate, it's like 1984, where I'm gonna be the one to defend you against these Iraqis that want to enslave you, right? He's a puppet of the West and all these different things. He had a whole system of propaganda. So he used the war to consolidate power and to expel and out any of his political opponents. And he created what's called, this was actually created before he was even in power, the Revolutionary Guard. So the Revolutionary Guard is a militia group, paramilitia group that takes orders directly from the Ayatollah. The Ayatollah is the supreme leader of Iran, a dictatorship. That group, which has become super, super. I have a post about it on my Instagram. You can check it out. There's a good video that describes how powerful and how lucrative they become throughout the decades. And they pretty much control all aspects of Iranian society. And they can supersede the military, right? Because they have a direct line with the Ayatollah, because their job is to protect the revolution, to protect the Islamic Republic and not Iranians, right? So Khomeini has this famous quote of him saying, allow, I don't care, paraphrasing, but the gist is that I don't care what happens to the land of Iran as long as Islam flourishes everywhere else. Khomeini was never a nationalistic kind of pro-Iranian guy. He could care less. All he cared about was his extremely narrow version of Islamism, which really, we can really say that it's not an Islamic republic. We can say that maybe it's a Khomeinic republic. This idea where he took his interpretation of it and he sort of invented this 20th century Islamism, which wasn't really a thing before. So he sort of created that and used that to take the Shah out, that he framed as a puppet for the West. And there's disagreements about that. Some people say it's rightly so. Some people say, well, he wasn't as bad. And some people say that it's a misrepresentation. But nevertheless, I think we would all, with the way things have turned out, many people are missing the Shah. But so he sort of used that as an excuse to gain power and control all aspects of society, media, again, like I said, the military, and so his successor, the current Ayatollah, I think Khomeini died in 89 or 1990, something like that. And Khamenei, so his successor, he's the current Ayatollah, so he's been in power for decades. So that's 43 years of Islamic dictatorship, which is where we're at now. That's sort of like a brief, like modern history of Iran.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And it really shows again, like the kind of wake, right, of certain actions and certain meddlings, right, and like the forces that kind of come in and then tell the story so much of the context of this moment. And so, of course, now the latest uprising, which I understand was started because of the death, the mysterious death, or at least according to I think the guard, right, of the woman who wasn't wearing her headscarf right appropriately, and that became the spark. That became the spark of sort of all of the discontent that seems to be roiling most of the time. But I also watched another short video recently of an analysis that said, the dictatorship's main modality is silence and separation. So like he calls it like a like a public secret, basically that everybody kind of knows something, but nobody talks about it, which is, maybe the discontent that people have, and they're separated from each other and just trying to get by, and so they don't come together. And here's a moment when everybody's stepping out to come together, and of course the crackdown seems utterly bankrupt in terms of any authority or moral authority that the regime might have, but horrific in its lethality as well. And you've certainly seemed to have been, really activated by seeing this unfold. And I'd be curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, so the lady's name was Masa Amini. So she was important because she is important because she became a symbol. But first of all, she was Kurdish. So Kurdistan, of course, has a long history of their fight for independence. They never got their own country for geopolitical reasons and just the way that things turned out. So there's a fear, there's a terrible fear that the regime has of the unity amongst different ethnic groups
Mm,
with the urbanite liberal. So the Kurdish uprising is always something that they have feared. So for Masa Amini to come to Tehran as a tourist and to have her get into a confrontation with the morality police because due to the nature of her hijab, which is very much not in line with Kurdish culture or like they have female fighters, right? It's a
mm,
it's a different sort of culture. So her death at the hands of the morality police became a kind of rally cry for many different groups in Iran because people said, well, that could be my sister. Um, that could be me. And, in Iran, many women wear their hijab, a little bit of hair here, and that's very commonplace. And we're at a point where the parents of the Hashtagis, so the Gen Z, the one that were born in the 80s in Islamic calendar, so the Gen Z, their parents very much understand how to survive in a dictatorship, and they
mm,
sort of are, yeah, like keep your head down, do what you can, sort of thing. Some of them don't even really realize how unhappy they actually are. And then the kids, the teenagers on TikTok and Instagram and their VPNs and looking at how other people live in the world, connecting with other diaspora like me, and looking at me, and looking at it the way other people live and wanting very normal things, to dance, to sing, to choose to follow a religion that they would like, or maybe a less narrow, less fundamentalist version of Islam. Many of these people are Muslims, so there is that change, there is that shift in the cultural conversation amongst young people, where in 2009 there was the reformist movement, the Green Revolution, which their slogan was like, "Where's my vote?" So there was conversations around Ahmadinejad stealing the election, which he did. And
mm,
so people took to the streets for that, and that was the reformist movement. That was like, no, we can change the system from within. We have to work with the system and change it and put in moderates. But that's proven wrong. I mean, the current president, Raisi, he was the architect of the 1988 massacres. Like there were so many executions of people, so many, so many in that year. And he was the architect of that, and he's the president. So the Ayatollah brought in a hardliner, ultra conservative, to wrangle power, and that shows a sign of desperation. Like they're seeing that generally people, even the rural, even the conservatives, even the type of people that would go to Hajj, even the type of people that would go to Shiite ceremonies, are kind of like, you know, I don't trust these guys, and I want something else. I want a choice. I want to be connected to the rest of the world. I want to have a representation in which we. I don't want a corrupt regime. I want to have more sovereignty over my own body, over my own village, over my own city. And so the conversation has sort of shifted to over like straight up regime change. And I couldn't be happier to finally see young people within Iran, in their own language, in their own village, town, city, putting together those slogans, articulating that, and really nailing it. It's been beautiful to see. And my favorite button is that translate button on Instagram. Let me see what they're saying,
Mm,
and I'm finding their voice. They're finding their voice, and they're inspiring other people. And then the reaction from the regime is, of course, not surprising. They're realizing how much of their own people hate their guts. And so the public executions right after Friday prayer, right? So in
yeah.
Islamic, like the Friday is the holy day. That's like their Sunday right after Friday prayer. Well, there Friday prayer. Well, there's a crane to hang a youth who participated in protests. Now, what they try to do is that they want to have the toughest guys, the rappers, the athletes, those one first to
Mm,
instill fear in the rest of everybody else. Now, uh, I don't know if this is my own wishful thinking, but so far I've seen people get even more angry, more hatred, more disillusionment, more um, uh, um, uh, straight up hate towards the regime for what they're doing. So I'm happy to see it having a negative effect, a reverse effect, an inverse effect from what they expected. So that's sort of where we're at. It's being escalated, but the protests and the the arsenal attacks on Basiji build. Basiji are this is another really interesting and and I think all totalitarian governments have something similar. So the Basiji are a branch of the Revolutionary Guard, which they're sort of like a volunteer group, and they volunteer their time in exchange for social credits, whether it be healthcare or even a bit of money. And they're plain clothes. These are guys in plain clothes walking around with pellet guns, sometimes paintball guns, or sometimes real guns, depending on where they are. See, they use real guns in Kurdistan or Baluchistan. Those are the ethnic groups. Baluchis are Sunni, so they're a religious minority, and they're more
mm,
rural. It's a rural area, so they're harsher on them because it's a little bit more. They fear their uprising more. But if all the different groups, inclusive of the middle class, upper middle class, elite, liberal, urban types that go to university, that unification is the thing that they fear the absolute most. So these public executions are to instill fear among the youth, but I'm happy to see that it's not really working. It's making the people hate them more, and that's a good thing because
mm,
it's showing how much of a absolute failure they are as the stewards of the land, and how much they have depleted the natural resources, have been more interested to go fund Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas,
mm,
Palestine, Yemen. It's like these people, Iranian people, their own people, the inflation is so crazy they can't even afford rice. So we're going over
mm,
to this fantasy of Palestine. It's like what that just shows exactly what's important to them. They're important. They're like they go in they go in they brutalize these failing states, Syria, Yemen, Iraq. They go and they have a hand in there, and it's sort of the analogy that I like to kind of paint out with that. It's sort of like this: you got your neighbor who is in a jam, like they're totally messed up, like their house got robbed and they're desperate, they can't protect themselves. Then you go in there and you exploit them. You sort of create divisions. You sort of set up a
mm,
shop there. You sort of go and try to influence them, exploit them, oppress them in your own way, make them into your own image, make them be buddy buddy with you and not your enemy, which is Israel and US. And so you go there and you exploit them and you go and massacre them and you back Assad, for example, to help with the Syrian civil war. Uh, and so that shows a lot about their what's important to them. It's not the Iranian people at all. Like all the stuff that they say about chastity and sovereignty. I mean, if you look at the videos and see the Basiji absolutely beat down and kick and humiliate, it's the point. Is
mm,
that they shoot the girls in the face and the generals on purpose.
wow.
It's an absolute hatred of these. these sort of see, this is what dogmatic theocracy does when it's in power. See, ISIS, and you see this in Taliban now. But ISIS, see, the thing about the Islamic Republic is that they're the ones that are in power. They're the ones that have control over the territory that they operate in. So, eh, so, so that and their behaviors and the things that are important to them are shown very clearly. It's not the Iranian people. So it's like we are. It's like an occupation under a foreigner's religion, a call, and I'm a Western liberal, so let me speak that language so I can really hit it home and put it in context, because for Westerners it sort of gets confusing when it's sort of brown on brown, and
Mm,
it's sort of a different language, and you're like, oh well, I don't know, I don't want to be Islamophobic, and maybe it's none of my business, and but let me paint it to you like this. It's sort of like this. It's like a foreigner's religion comes and conquests a land, and then you have this foreign religion and the people that embody it the most takes precedence over the democracy or what the people want. That's sort of where we're at with Iran, and there's going to be a day where the Islamic Republic falls, and it's going to be up to Iranian people and the diaspora to kind of rebuild it back up. But man, they have depleted so much natural water. Air
mm,
pollution is terrible for old people in the summer, and selling off so much of the country to China, sending drones to Ukraine for Putin. It's like all of these backwards and uh, priorities that the Iranian people, if you ask them, they could care less about all that stuff. All they care about is inflation and jobs, jobs, being able to compete in the marketplace, and being able to sell their goods like a normal country. Like Iranian people, like there was a point in time where Iran and Turkey were very much just at the same level. But man,
mm,
Iranian people, when they have the money to do so, they go as tourists to Turkey, and so that really puts something in perspective, where you see Turkey went up and up and up, and Iran went down and down and down. And so people are starting to put two and two together and realize that this regime does not give a shit about us. They only care about their power and the resources that they've been hoarding and depleting from the people.
mm. Thanks for laying that all out. I want to return to something you mentioned too. Well, specifically also around what I feel I witness is one example is there's this dancer. It's an Iranian dancer, right? It's a man, and there was a video posted through Instagram channel, I think Middle East Matters or something, and he stares at the camera and he says, "This is for all the 43 years of suppression of artists," or something like that. And then he does, he proceeds to do a dance. Maybe you've seen the video, and
Yeah,
and then the video says, he was
breakdancing.
arrested.
Yeah,
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 exactly. Yeah, and then he was arrested, a few days later for this video. And for me, that's such a terrible and ineffective representation of a kind of regime that is terrified of, I don't know what to call it. Like the one way is eros, like terrified of just life energy expressing itself in beautiful ways. That's what it seems to be, and the sort of mirrored as well within women. Like I see a regime that is terrified of women, terrified of the fullness of the beauty, the vivaciousness, the just, yeah, that the gifts of women. That's what I see when I see this crackdown, this. And again, I don't want to go into some sort of often there's this kind of judgment of women in the West, they're totally free and that's the ideal scenario, and women there, they're totally oppressed. It's not quite, I'm not trying to do that kind of binary, but what I'm trying to show, or trying to, I guess, observe, is that there's something around this fear that seems to be also at the heart of, one, you could call it patriarchy, if that's one word to use. I've often used the word domination culture, right, which comes from this suppression and deeply, this fear of, one could even say the feminine, like this deep fear of the feminine, which means that it works at the level of the individual, but also the level of whole regimes that want to control this energy. Like they want to control because it's so terrifying. And so again, I wonder from that meta level as well, like, is that the kind of thing that you see, that there's this yeah, this dynamic between this fear of what would the people actually do if they were allowed to be free and express themselves in beautiful ways, if women were actually able to, be be wholly who they are. uh, anyway, I
Mhm.
just wanted to raise that up because that's kind of what I'm seeing so crystal clear.
Yeah, so that breakdancer, yeah. So a guy like that who's public facing is, not a petite man. This is somebody who has a following, and he's kind of mm, Persianified Western black uh, kind of lingo, movements, etc., b-boy, rapping, that sort of thing. um, a guy like that is seen as a big threat because a guy like that, they see how popular that stuff is within the youth. Farsi rap is huge in Iran. Some of the rappers are in exile, like each cast. He's in Malaysia, and so so they see that as a threat to their control. So what about women? Why women? So when Khomeini took power, it's one of the first things he did was instill the mandatory hijab law. Um, and another place that was a big threat to him was the public square, and the public square it's the universities. So having henchmen, spies in the universities controlling the thoughts and the feelings of young people throughout the 80s. This is why the universities are such a hotbed right now for um, for the regime to intervene. There's been reports of them intentionally poisoning the
Mm.
cafeteria food. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that? Like, and I'm talking about like the Harvard of Tehran, Sharif University. Like, I'm talking about like high-end places that the average Iranian doesn't even get into. Like, these are very like high IQ STEM areas, right? So the control of nuance, innovative thought in the university and amongst women are some of the biggest threats to this old man 1400, 14th century thinking. So maybe I could illustrate an example, right? Like imagine how do I say it? It's sort of like imagine an old man who couldn't even begin to wrap their head around a social situation in which they are speaking and they're being interrupted by a woman who has a different opinion. To a guy that isn't used to that, that's absolutely infuriating. They hate that. They can't stand that. They want a lecture and they don't want to hear a young person, especially a woman, having a different view because it means that they are out of they may just be out of touch. So so there's this concept called forced paradise, right? So what the Islamists want for the Iranian people, as their propaganda would phrase it like this, is like, we are keeping you pure and defending your dignity as a woman. This is about chastity. This is about, we don't want you to be a whore. Okay? and 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 you don't want to be that either. So that's sort of the narrative that they pull on it. But I love seeing these videos of these girls saying, chanting at the school, "No, you're the perv, you're the whore. I am a free woman. You're the perv, you're the whore." And nothing could, like, that's so true. So the woman is seen as something that you can control. When you can control the woman, you can control the family, and you can control intergenerational wisdom or anti-wisdom. You can control that fundamental aspect of society. Um, and when you suppress them and convince them of the sort of Stockholm syndrome of like, okay, I mean, we may not be perfect, but do you really want to be controlled by ISIS? What about what the Americans do when they rape Palestinians, or some sort of crazy narrative that they sort of come up with I guess sort of have kernels of truth into it, but it's a fiction. So what we're seeing now is like public defiance of this bullshit right in the street and with a camera, spread circumventing their blackouts, which they're losing a lot of money, by the way. When they do these blackouts, the intergovernmental sites, they can't function, so they're losing so much money. So that's key, because then some of the people that benefit greatly from the regime, like these families that have the oil contracts in Venezuela, Nicaragua, North Korea, China, when they're doing these dealings, these limited dealings that they're able to do, once so further pressure on them is forcing industries in Iran to strike, which is great. So the bazaars, we're seeing strikes happening in different sectors, truckers, which is great. And we're praying and praying, praying for a general strike. So it goes all across the country. But the key here, man, is like when you see those videos, there's this one video and so many of them, but one I remember is a woman being dragged uh,
Mm.
to a car, screaming, help me, by these plainclothes Basiji with guns. And these guys, everybody wears masks, right? Everybody wears face masks and balaclavas. And, they're nervous, right? Because they're surrounded by the society. But the society can't do anything because they don't have guns. They don't have anything. So I just sort of wish there was like a little bit of that Texas libertarian
Mm.
culture, like in Tehran. That's sort of what you need. The people have to have guns, and so I see a lot of conversation, and I guess people are sort of reluctant to talk about it like that. But
Mm.
it's pretty obvious to me what's needed. You can't fight. Yeah, you can do a lot with, Iran was removed from the Women's Commission in the UN, and that's great. It shows them getting disrespected on a global level. I love it. And I'll always remember those countries that voted to keep them in: Nicaragua, Nigeria,
Mm.
China, obviously, Russia. I'm going to remember that. But the ones that voted to oust them, that's amazing. That's good. That's definitely a step in the right direction. But fundamentally, what made the Shah lose in '79 was there's this super tragic story. It's called Cinema Rex. Cinema Rex
Mm.
was a cinema that showed a lot of movies, and some of the movies they showed were popular Western films at the time, super mainstream films. There was Shiite Islamist revolutionaries. They burned the place down. There were 600 people in the theater. 300 escaped from the roof. The other 300 burned to death. So they ignited. They closed the doors, like they locked them in there. They set the place on fire with jet fuel. The narrative that Khomeini said was that the Shah did it. The Shah did that, right? And this is 1979. Like there wasn't TikTok's not a good example. Instagram, for example. So I believe the impression is that it was sort of confused and people didn't exactly know, and they were like, "Oh, maybe it was the Shah." And so I love seeing this. There's this video of these schoolgirls saying basically, no, we remember Rex Cinema, we remember what you did, and they understand that no, it was the Islamists that did that, and of course it makes sense. It's a cinema showing Western movies, and this sort of jihadist terrorism that at this point, I hope that even the progressives can sort of wake up and being like, look, this is real. Like, take that Islamophobia stuff, put it in a bucket, put a bow on it, and take that out when you need it for anti-Muslim bigotry in the West. Okay. But for the most part, for those of us who have families that live in Muslim majority countries, pretty hard to be a minority, a visible minority, a religious minority, an ethnic minority in countries that are Islamist. So,
Mm.
so that's at the heart of where the passion comes from for me. Looking at how these young people get it, they see, they know what they did in the past, and they're smarter than that. So it's just really a matter of time before the regime falls. But it's going to get so much worse because a dying old man who has absolute power, the kind of guy, everybody knows somebody like this in their family. Old, usually a guy, older guy, always has been in power. You know, he had his own company or he was like the lead in the family. Watch that guy lose a little bit of power, and man,
Mm.
does it get awkward. You know, man, does he get vicious? Does he get, he doesn't just give it up easily, you know? So
Mm.
it's going to get so much worse. But the alienation that they're creating amongst the people, I think, is hard to deny, and it's very visible. But my uncle told me something that was very sobering. You know, he was like, "Look, these guys will burn the whole place down, take the money they made, and leave if they felt
Mhm.
that their power was threatened." Right now, in their headspace, you know, I think that it's hard to know, and they're not like they're bright enough to brutalize their own people because those are the ones that are in proximity, like Trump, right? Like he's a con man, and he's good at conning people that are just like him. You know, white
Mm.
rules. Well, he's not rural at all, but he's playing to that, right? He's framing himself as that strong man. So the guys that get screwed over by Trump the most are people that are a lot like him. So
Mm.
con men are able to convince people within their physical proximity to basically con them. So that's what's happening. That's what these con men that are in power for 43 years have been doing. But we're slowly seeing their grip get loosened and
Mm.
direct and public defiance right to their face, which is unprecedented. And there's this one video I saw of this one woman in the subway saying "Ahun." Ahun is like a Islam, like a mullah, or Islamic priest. Like Borogom show, Azinja, Borogom, like get out of here. You know, we don't want you. Get out of here from here. Get away from here. And then this old man in full Islamic garb and his white turban, the classic look for the Islamist, Iranian Islamist, he says, "You want me to go?" Like, yeah, he had never heard something like that in his whole life. It's like now you're hearing it like to your face because his whole life is doing sermons in front of a bunch of men. He's never interrupted. Goes and has his tea. Goes to his house. Sermon. Da 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 da. But now he's in the subway being he has his turban flipped over, which I love to see. I love to see
Mm.
that because it's a public defiance. Um, and another thing that's been really annoying for me is to see where's the Canadian Muslim Society? Where's their
Mm.
solidarity? I saw their Instagram. It's all talking about Islamophobia. It's like, and then you sort of realize is that, let's talk about allyship. Like, who has been there for us? Who hasn't been there for us? Israel really showed up, and I'm going to remember
Mm.
that. So that's key for me, and that's a personal takeaway that I think is vital. But I find that institutional Islamic groups in the West, where have they been? They're more interested to, I guess, sort of protect their own personal image, so that shows a lot about where their loyalties are and where we need
Mm.
to be spending our efforts. Uh, so those are some
Mm.
thoughts I had about sort of uh, where things have shifted for me politically, social politically, with what's happening. And it really, when you're in a tragedy, um, and you're in a sort of like fight or flight situation, it really shows you what your priorities are. My priorities are pure and simple. I want my son, and we're gonna try for a second, and
Mhm.
hopefully it's a girl. And I fantasize about her being able to go. I wanted to go to McGill, uh, like me, and I fantasize about her being able to visit her father's birthplace and do a semester there, learning Persian calligraphy, like a normal, like as if it's a normal country that you can trust the dude at the airport. You can trust that your visa won't be revoked when you're trying to leave. It's just not. We're far away from that, but that's
Mm.
sort of the dream, and that's sort of the fantasy that's feeling like it's turning into reality because I'm listening to the girls and they get that and they want the same thing.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Well, Thanks, Maziar. We just have a minute or two left, and I wonder,
Sure.
what's the invitation for folks how to support? I mean, is it tracking what's shared online, resharing it, kind of calling out groups that should be actually coming out to show support but aren't? What would be some ways in which they could support?
I would say the only donation site that I trust and know is the victims of Flight 752. That's the one that I'm going to be doing a few projects on for to raise money for them. So if there's financial support that folks that are listening want to give, so it's victims of Flight 752. That's the one that I know is led by families that are directly affected by how the regime shot down the plane of innocence um, coming from Canada as a Ukrainian flight. So that's one way. Stay in touch with me, follow me, check out the stuff that I've been posting. I share posts from folks I really look up to, and try my best to share those. And this project has sort of this revolution has inspired a lot of art projects that I'm going to be releasing throughout the year, and to sort of amplify the voices of people on the ground. I want to do memorial services through art and projection mapping onto buildings, big things to remind people that this is not going away, and we won't stop until we see a free Iran and Iranians living a normal life that we take for granted. And to what you said a little bit, right, about like East West and, oh, what's so good about us? Look, man, it's they want a normal life. They want to be able to choose, and they want to be able to choose. They want to be able to choose the type of Islam that they would like to, rather than coming from the state. The
Mm,
state, the state religion should be something private. The politicization of religion is absolutely, it's like they're killing themselves. It's like, you want a way to hate, you
mm,
want me to hate paradise? Force it upon me, and I'll hate it, and I'll hate your guts. I'll be afraid, and I won't say it to your face, but at my mehmuni or at my dinner party, we are ridiculing you. We are not showing up to prayer, and whatever you like, we like the opposite. Forcing stuff onto people, and we've understood that with the vaccine. We've understood that with the different elements of the pandemic that we went through. You force something onto somebody, you're basically saying to them, we don't respect your opinion, and you don't have the IQ to do it on your own, so we're going to force it upon you. That's a sure way after time to have people hate your guts. That's where we're at.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Well, Maziar, thanks for
Yeah.
laying out so much. And
You got it,
I
brother.
definitely, it helped a lot to map some pieces, and also to feel hopefully this is in service again to that uprising and the support of those folks over there. And thanks for taking the time here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Crow's Nest. Please consider writing a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing this episode with your friends. To learn more about the School of Mythopoetics and attend our upcoming events, visit schoolofmythopoetics.com.